Liana Brooks hummed softly while preparing breakfast, one hand resting over the gentle curve of her 6-month pregnant belly as golden morning light filtered through the kitchen window. Fresh bread warmed in the oven, coffee filled the room with its comforting aroma, and the tiny nursery down the hall stood ready for the little boy she and her husband could hardly wait to meet. Every corner of their modest home reflected months of shared dreams, from the hand-painted stars on the nursery ceiling to the framed photographs capturing laughter that had once seemed endless. She smiled when she heard the front door open, expecting Elias Ashford to wrap his arms around her from behind as he always did after returning from an early meeting. Instead, he stepped inside looking pale and exhausted, his usually gentle expression replaced by a frightening emptiness that made her heartbeat stumble. He stood silently for several moments, unable to meet her hopeful eyes, while invisible anguish tightened every muscle in his body. Liana asked whether something terrible had happened at work, but he answered only with a slow shake of his head before drawing a long, painful breath. Finally he whispered the 7 words that shattered her world forever. "I don't want this child anymore." The sentence lingered between them like broken glass, cutting through every promise they had ever made. Before she could force herself to speak, he continued with a voice so cold it scarcely sounded like his own. "I never wanted to be a father." Tears filled her eyes as she searched his face for some sign of a cruel joke or desperate misunderstanding. None appeared. He swallowed hard, looked directly into her eyes and delivered one final blow. "I don't love you anymore." Her knees weakened, and she caught the edge of the kitchen table before collapsing completely. She begged him to explain, to tell her what had changed overnight, yet he simply turned away, refusing to answer another question. As the front door closed behind him, the silence became almost unbearable. 3 years earlier, neither of them could have imagined such a morning. They had first met during a violent autumn storm that flooded streets and trapped frightened pedestrians between rising currents. Liana, returning from an evening rehearsal at the elementary school where she taught music, slipped from a submerged sidewalk and was swept toward deeper water. People shouted helplessly from safer ground, afraid to risk their own lives against the powerful current. Elias, then an ambitious architect rushing home after inspecting a construction site, saw her disappear beneath the muddy water without hesitation. Ignoring every warning, he fought through the flood until he reached her, pulled her safely into his arms, and carried her toward higher ground before emergency crews arrived. Shivering beneath a shared blanket, Liana thanked the stranger whose courage had saved her life, while Elias dismissed her gratitude with an awkward smile that revealed genuine humility. Their chance meeting became the beginning of countless conversations over coffee, quiet walks through city parks, and handwritten letters exchanged whenever work kept them apart. Instead of expensive gifts, they treasured simple moments, dancing barefoot in cramped apartments, laughing over burnt dinners, and dreaming about the future while watching stars from apartment rooftops. Financial hardship tested them often, especially during Elias's early years establishing his architectural practice, yet every setback strengthened their partnership rather than weakening it. When one struggled, the other carried hope for both. Liana believed love grew strongest through ordinary sacrifices, while Elias admired her unwavering compassion toward everyone she met. Months after their wedding, Liana discovered she was pregnant and planned a surprise she would never forget. She placed a tiny pair of knitted baby shoes beside a positive pregnancy test and waited nervously until Elias returned home. The moment he understood, joyful tears streamed down his face as he embraced her with trembling arms. He laughed, cried, and promised their child would always know unconditional love because he intended to become the father he himself had never experienced. Together they painted the nursery, debated colors with playful determination, assembled furniture despite confusing instructions, and finally chose the name Noah because it reminded them of hope after every storm. Those precious weeks convinced Liana their happiest chapter had only begun. Then one evening, after everyone else had left his office, Elias discovered an unmarked envelope waiting on his desk. Inside lay photographs of Liana taken through windows, outside grocery stores, and leaving medical appointments. The final image showed her sleeping peacefully while a red laser sight rested across her pregnant stomach. Beneath it, a single message read, "Leave your wife and unborn child or they die." The next morning he shattered the heart he loved most, then walked away before she could see the tears finally breaking free. Liana Brooks left the little house carrying only 2 suitcases, a box of baby clothes, and a heart so fractured she wondered whether it could ever feel whole again. She never looked back because she feared one final glance might destroy the fragile strength keeping her feet moving. Every step felt heavier than the last, Yet the gentle kicks from the child beneath her heart reminded her that surrender was no longer an option. She rented a cramped apartment above an aging grocery store where creaking floors and peeling paint replaced the warmth she had once called home. The single bedroom barely accommodated a second-hand crib, but she transformed the tiny space into a sanctuary with soft lullabies and handmade decorations. Money disappeared quickly, forcing her to accept every opportunity to earn another paycheck before Noah arrived. She continued teaching music at the elementary school throughout the day, then spent evenings giving private piano lessons until exhaustion blurred the notes before her eyes. On weekends she cleaned empty classrooms, quietly mopping floors while imagining happier days for the son she had not yet met. Her body ached beneath the strain of pregnancy and relentless work, yet she refused to complain because every sacrifice promised Noah a safer beginning. Grief accompanied her everywhere, surfacing unexpectedly whenever she passed families laughing together or noticed fathers carrying sleepy children on their shoulders. She replayed Elias's cruel words countless times, searching for hidden meaning, but each memory ended with the same unbearable silence. Despite the heartbreak, bitterness never settled inside her because she refused to let hatred shape the child growing within her. Instead, she sought comfort by helping people whose suffering exceeded her own. Every Thursday afternoon after finishing school, she volunteered at the Children's Hospital, offering free music lessons to young patients facing illnesses they scarcely understood. Tiny hands gripped toy instruments while frightened faces slowly brightened beneath familiar melodies. Watching fragile smiles replace fearful tears reminded Liana that kindness remained powerful even when life seemed painfully unfair. She returned home emotionally drained but spiritually steadier, believing every joyful song honored the future she still hoped Noah would inherit. Across the city, Elias Ashford lived inside a different prison, one built from secrecy instead of loneliness. The mysterious envelope had forced him into a dangerous alliance with investigators pursuing Damien Cross, the celebrated chief executive whose construction empire concealed an immense network of financial crimes. Publicly admired for transforming skylines, Damien secretly diverted billions through fraudulent projects, bribed influential officials, and eliminated anyone threatening his operations. Elias had unknowingly uncovered evidence while reviewing architectural records, making him both a valuable witness and a marked target. Federal investigators insisted complete silence offered the only chance of protecting Liana because every intercepted message confirmed the criminals monitored their lives continuously. Elias accepted the unbearable burden, convincing himself her hatred remained preferable to her funeral. The enemies surrounding Damien soon demonstrated that their threats were neither theatrical nor empty. Elias's car lost its brakes while descending a steep hillside, leaving him seconds from death before crashing into a roadside barrier. Weeks later, flames consumed his architectural office overnight, destroying years of designs and nearly trapping him inside. Soon afterward, his loyal dog collapsed after eating poisoned food left outside his apartment, and the heartbreaking loss deepened his determination to finish exposing the organization responsible. The violence escalated again when an explosion ripped through one of his construction site's moments after he completed an inspection. Flying debris knocked him unconscious, leaving investigators certain someone had intended to erase him permanently. Bruised and shaken, Elias finally understood the terrifying truth hidden beneath every warning. If he returned to Liana before Damien's empire collapsed, the people hunting him would eventually reach her and their unborn son. Meanwhile, winter settled heavily across the city, coating streets with ice and numbing winds that punished anyone caught outdoors too long. One evening, Liana finished her final piano lesson and attempted the long walk home after missing the last bus. Fatigue overwhelmed her aching body, and dizziness blurred the snow-covered sidewalks until everything faded into darkness. Pedestrians hurried past without stopping, eager to escape the bitter cold before another storm arrived. A homeless veteran carrying a weathered backpack noticed her collapse and immediately rushed to her side. Without hesitation, he wrapped her in his only blanket, called an ambulance from a borrowed phone, and remained outside the hospital entrance throughout the freezing night until doctors confirmed she and the baby would survive. Before sunrise, he quietly disappeared without asking for recognition. Months later, determined to repay impossible kindness, Liana searched until she found him, unaware that one compassionate decision would eventually transform all their futures. Spring arrived with gentle rain on the morning Liana Brooks gave birth to a healthy baby boy whose first cry dissolved months of fear into overwhelming relief. She held him against her heart, whispered the name Noah, and silently promised that no disappointment would ever convince him he was unwanted. Friends suggested choosing another name because it carried memories of Elias, Yet she refused, believing hope should never be abandoned simply because love had been wounded. From Noah's earliest days she filled their modest apartment with music, laughter, and bedtime stories celebrating courage instead of revenge. Whenever curious neighbors criticized the father who had disappeared before his son's birth, Liana answered only with quiet dignity and changed the subject before resentment could take root. She wanted Noah to inherit compassion rather than suspicion, trusting that bitterness always demanded a heavier price than forgiveness. As the years passed, the little apartment gradually became a gathering place for children whose families could not afford music lessons. Liana accepted every student without asking whether parents could pay, believing talent deserved encouragement regardless of circumstance. She quietly purchased second-hand instruments, repaired broken violins, and transformed forgotten melodies into opportunities that changed young lives. When she noticed elderly shoppers counting coins at grocery stores, she anonymously covered their bills before slipping away unnoticed. Injured stray animals found shelter in her small backyard until loving homes could be found. Her generosity spread through the neighborhood without seeking applause, inspiring others to practice the same quiet kindness. Encouraged by volunteers who admired her dedication, she eventually opened a free community music school where children from struggling families discovered confidence through songs that celebrated hope instead of hardship. Noah grew within that atmosphere of generosity, learning by example that the strongest people were often those who served without expecting recognition. Every evening his mother reminded him that kind hearts never truly lost because goodness always echoed beyond the moment it was offered. Across town, Elias Ashford measured time differently, counting birthdays he could not celebrate and milestones he could witness only from a distance. The investigation surrounding Damien Cross remained active, forcing him to maintain the painful separation that protected the family he still loved beyond reason. Anonymous transfers quietly paid overdue bills whenever Liana faced financial strain, though she never discovered their source. Each birthday a carefully chosen gift appeared outside her apartment before sunrise with no card revealing the sender. Elias attended Noah's school concerts hidden among parents seated near the back, listening proudly as his son's bright smile reflected the same warmth Liana carried years earlier. He always departed before the applause ended, unwilling to risk even the smallest chance of exposing them to dangerous eyes. Watching Noah grow from afar demanded extraordinary restraint because every instinct urged him to introduce himself, embrace his son, and explain everything. Instead he accepted loneliness as the cost of keeping them alive. The years etched quiet sorrow across his face, yet they never weakened his resolve to finish exposing the criminal empire threatening innocent families. Then one bitter winter afternoon everything changed with terrifying speed. Noah's school bus crossed an icy bridge just as freezing rain turned the roadway into polished glass. The driver struggled desperately for control, but the heavy vehicle skidded sideways, smashed through a guardrail, and crashed against twisted steel overlooking the frozen river below. The impact trapped frightened children beneath shattered seats while diesel fuel spilled across the floor. Panicked parents arrived within minutes, screaming helplessly as smoke drifted from the damaged engine. Emergency crews battled impossible traffic, leaving precious moments slipping away. Elias happened to be driving nearby after meeting investigators and saw the chaos unfolding ahead. Without pausing to consider the danger, he abandoned his car and sprinted toward the crippled bus. Flames erupted beneath the engine as he climbed through a broken window, ignoring sharp metal that tore his hands and clothing. One by one he lifted terrified children into waiting arms outside, encouraging each frightened face with calm determination despite thick smoke filling his lungs. Every successful rescue strengthened his resolve until a frightened voice called weakly from the rear of the bus. Crawling beneath collapsing seats, Elias discovered Noah pinned beneath twisted metal, his small face streaked with tears and soot. Recognition struck like lightning, yet there was no time for explanation. Summoning every remaining ounce of strength, Elias forced the heavy wreckage aside, gathered Noah into his arms, and staggered toward the exit. They reached safety only seconds before the bus exploded into towering flames that sent burning debris across the bridge. The blast hurled Elias violently onto the frozen pavement, leaving severe burns across his arms and back. As shocked witnesses rushed toward the rescued children, he disappeared into the confusion before anyone could identify him, unwilling to expose Noah to enemies who might still be watching. News reports praised the mysterious stranger whose courage had saved an entire busload of children, while Liana held Noah through the night, unaware that the unseen hero carrying scars into the darkness was the husband she still believed had abandoned them forever. The investigation that had consumed years of sacrifice finally reached its breaking point when federal agents executed coordinated raids against Damian Cross and the executives who had helped conceal his criminal empire. Offices were sealed, financial records seized, encrypted computers recovered, and long-hidden witnesses stepped forward once they realized the organization could no longer silence them. News broadcasts celebrated the dramatic arrests, describing billions of dollars in fraudulent construction contracts and countless lives damaged by corruption. Liana Brooks watched the reports with quiet curiosity, never imagining the story unfolding across every television screen had shaped the destruction of her own family. She believed it was simply another powerful businessman facing justice, unaware that the truth was already moving toward her doorstep. 2 days later, a veteran detective arrived at her music school carrying a weathered file thick enough to reveal years of carefully guarded secrets. He politely asked for a private conversation, and the seriousness in his voice erased any thought of refusing. Inside his office he placed photographs across the table, each one more unsettling than the last. Liana recognized images of herself entering grocery stores, leaving medical appointments, walking through neighborhood parks, and sleeping peacefully inside the home she had once shared with Elias. Her hands trembled as the detective explained that criminal operatives had monitored her movements for months after Elias unknowingly uncovered evidence exposing Damian's illegal network. He showed her the anonymous threat ordering Elias to abandon his wife and unborn child or watch them both die. Every cruel word Elias had spoken suddenly echoed inside her mind with unbearable clarity, no longer sounding heartless but painfully deliberate. Tears blurred her vision as the detective continued revealing records of sabotaged vehicles, burned offices, poisoned pets, and assassination attempts that had followed Elias after he refused to abandon the investigation. He produced financial documents proving anonymous payments covering overdue rent, school expenses, and medical bills had all originated from accounts controlled secretly by Elias through trusted intermediaries. Photographs taken from the back row of Noah's school concerts showed a familiar figure watching quietly before disappearing unnoticed. Copies of receipts documented birthday gifts purchased every year, each delivered without revealing the giver's identity. Liana struggled to breathe beneath the overwhelming weight of truth. Every lonely holiday, every unexplained blessing, every mysterious act of generosity suddenly belonged to the man she had believed capable only of rejection. The detective lowered his voice before sharing one final revelation. The unidentified hero who had rescued Noah and the other children from the burning school bus had been Elias. Severe burns covered much of his body, and he remained hospitalized under heavy security because investigators feared surviving members of Damian's organization might still seek revenge. Liana closed her eyes as heartbreaking understanding replaced years of unanswered questions. She realized Elias had carried the burden of appearing cruel because kindness would have placed their lives in immediate danger. Without another word she rushed from the building, collected Noah from school, and drove directly to the hospital. Every mile felt painfully slow as regret and hope battled within her heart. Noah sensed his mother's trembling hands but asked no questions, trusting she would explain when she could. Inside the burn unit they found Elias resting beneath white blankets, his face marked by healing injuries and quiet exhaustion. Hearing footsteps, he slowly opened his eyes and saw Liana standing beside his bed with Noah holding her hand. He looked away almost immediately, convinced she had come only to close the final chapter between them. Instead, Liana guided Noah forward until the boy stood beside the bed. Noah smiled warmly at the injured stranger who had unknowingly become his hero and whispered, "Thank you for saving me." Elias covered his face as years of restrained emotion finally overwhelmed him. Silent tears escaped despite every effort to remain composed. Liana gently reached for his trembling hand and admitted she finally knew everything. She apologized for believing hatred had replaced love, while Elias apologized for leaving her to endure unimaginable loneliness without explanation. Neither pretended the lost years could simply disappear, yet both understood the truth had restored something precious that deception had stolen. Before hope could settle completely, investigators uncovered the final piece of the conspiracy. Margaret Ashford, Elias's wealthy and manipulative stepmother, had secretly partnered with Damian from the beginning. Motivated by greed and determined to secure Elias's inheritance for herself, she had leaked private information about the family, fabricated misleading evidence, and ensured every threat reached exactly where it would cause the deepest emotional damage. Her betrayal stunned even seasoned investigators because she had hidden behind respectability while orchestrating extraordinary cruelty. Margaret and Damian were arrested together, ending the conspiracy that had poisoned so many innocent lives. As officers escorted them away, Elias looked through the hospital window toward the setting sun, knowing freedom had finally arrived, yet wondering whether forgiveness could rebuild everything fear had once destroyed. Months passed before Elias Ashford fully recovered from the injuries he had suffered rescuing the children trapped inside the burning school bus. Physical therapy demanded patience, and the scars covering his arms reminded him daily of everything fear had stolen from his family. Yet each painful step forward became easier because Liana Brooks and Noah never left his side. Healing their relationships proved slower than healing broken skin, but honesty gradually replaced the silence that had once separated them. They spoke openly about the years they had lost, the loneliness they had endured, and the future they still hoped to build together. Noah listened carefully as his parents explained the truth in gentle, age-appropriate words, never disguising the sacrifices that had protected his life. Instead of responding with anger, the boy embraced his father and declared that courage sometimes looked different from what people expected. Those simple words lifted a burden Elias had carried since the morning he walked away from the woman he loved. Although he remained the rightful heir to a substantial fortune, wealth no longer represented success in his eyes. Surviving years of danger had transformed his priorities beyond recognition. Rather than reclaiming a luxurious lifestyle, he proposed using nearly everything he owned to create a place where broken lives could begin again. Liana immediately supported the dream because she understood that the deepest wounds often required more than sympathy to heal. Together they purchased a large property and transformed it into a welcoming refuge they named the Noah House, honoring the child whose existence had inspired impossible sacrifices and enduring hope. The center offered safe housing for pregnant women escaping abusive homes, giving them security when they had nowhere else to turn. Homeless veterans received comfortable apartments, counseling, and meaningful employment that restored dignity instead of dependence. Orphan children found educational support, patient mentors, and opportunities to imagine brighter futures. Fathers struggling with fear or uncertainty attended parenting classes designed to strengthen families before they fractured. Volunteer doctors provided free medical care to neighbors unable to afford treatment, while music and art therapy filled bright rooms with creativity instead of despair. Every service reflected a lesson learned through pain, proving compassion became strongest when shaped by personal experience. Liana insisted that healing should include beauty as well as safety, so gardens surrounded the buildings, laughter echoed through playgrounds, and music drifted from practice rooms throughout the day. The homeless veteran who had once wrapped his only blanket around a pregnant stranger accepted the invitation to become the home's first director. Years earlier he had believed society had forgotten him forever, yet Liana's kindness had restored his confidence, and now he dedicated himself to ensuring every resident felt seen and valued. His remarkable journey reminded visitors that a single generous act could transform countless futures in ways no one could predict. During the grand opening ceremony, families from every corner of the community gathered to celebrate the remarkable achievement. The children rescued from the school bus returned with their parents, each carrying flowers to thank the man whose bravery had preserved their lives. Watching them laugh together filled Elias with quiet gratitude because their happiness proved every sacrifice had ultimately protected something priceless. Reporters crowded around him, eager to understand why a respected architect would surrender nearly all his fortune instead of expanding his business empire. Elias looked toward Liana before answering with complete sincerity. He smiled, reached gently for her hand and said, "Because love grows only when you give it away." His words spread quickly through newspapers and television interviews, yet those who truly knew him understood they represented lived conviction rather than polished inspiration. Years flowed peacefully after that unforgettable day, bringing ordinary moments the family once feared they would never share. Noah inherited his mother's compassion and his father's determination, eventually graduating from medical school with highest honors. During the commencement ceremony he stepped confidently to the podium and paused before addressing the crowded auditorium. "Many people think my father abandoned me," he began, allowing the familiar misunderstanding to settle over the audience. Then he smiled warmly toward Elias sitting beside Liana in the front row. "They're wrong. He spent years loving me where I couldn't see him." The room erupted into sustained applause as Noah walked directly into the audience and embraced both of his parents, celebrating not perfection but forgiveness earned through extraordinary sacrifice. Later, as they left the ceremony together, Noah noticed the small nursery key his parents had quietly preserved throughout every painful year. Laughing softly, he held it up and suggested that perhaps it was finally time to build that room again. Liana exchanged an emotional glance with Elias before either could answer, At that moment a little girl from the adoption center they had long supported ran toward them with joyful excitement and threw her arms around Liana while happily calling her mom. Tears filled every eye as the family completed the adoption they had been preparing in secret, giving Noah a little sister and another child the security of unconditional love. Together they walked toward the Noah house, where dozens of smiling children waited to welcome them home, proving the greatest families are often created through courage, forgiveness, kindness, and hope.